All right, hello there, welcome back to another wee bit different video. Today's video, we are going to be looking at a Baldur's Gate 3 Cantrips tier list maker. Now, I've put in several, and by several, I mean a shit ton of hours into Baldur's Gate 3. I've used almost all of these cantrips, and if I haven't used them, I've at least seen them a little bit. But if you're not familiar with Baldur's Gate 3 cantrips, let me briefly explain. I don't know why you wouldn't be, but let me just briefly explain. Basically, they're spells that don't require actual spell slots. You can actually just use them an unlimited amount of times. And if you're not familiar with all of them, we have Acid Splash, Blade Ward, Bone Chill, Dancing Lights, Eldritch Blast, Firebolt, Friends, Mage Hand, Guidance, Light, Mage Hand again, the other one was the Githyanki one, Minor Illusion, Poison Spray, Produce Flame, Ray of Frost, Resistance, Sacred Flame, Saloon's Dream doesn't count, I believe, Shillelagh, I don't know how to pronounce that, to be honest with you, Shocking Grasp, Thaumaturgy, Thorn Whip, and wait, is there any more? True Strike, Vicious Mockery. Okay, so those are all of the cantrips. We are going to be ranking them to the best of our abilities. Of course, it is subjective. You know, what you think is S tier or A tier, B tier might not necessarily be my S tier, A tier, B tier. It entirely depends on your builds and how often you have used it. I think there's some common ranks in how people view some of these, but I suggest that you try some of the ones that maybe you don't agree with, or maybe I should try some of the ones that you think are better than what I think. But that's the whole point of this discussion. Anyway, let's start off with the obvious S tier, because yes, I do believe there are some cantrips on here that are just super obvious, so let's get them out of the way. Okay, so the obvious ones, definitely Eldritch Blast is probably the best cantrip in the whole game. You can do entire builds off of this one cantrip, and there's Eldritch Invocations dedicated just to making this cantrip better. I don't think there's any other cantrip remotely like it. It is really powerful in the right hands. Plus, again, it doesn't require those spell slots, so that's really important. And next up in the S tier, we do have Friends. Friends, in my opinion, is undisputed S tier. I think there's only 2 definitive S tiers. The rest you can for sure argue. No. Guidance is S tier. What am I saying? I think these are the 3 definitive S tier ones. The rest you can argue. You could say, for example, Mage Hand. Hey, I think that's S tier. I wouldn't be looking at you like you're stupid. Do I think it's S tier? No, I don't think it's definitive. I think it's more so, well, I guess since we're talking about Mage Hand, let's rank Mage Hand. I think Mage Hand is A tier. Now, to some of the people that are like, dude, Mage Hand sucks or Mage Hand is better, let me give you my reasoning as to why it's A tier. For one, to the people that say it sucks, let's just quickly give a brief overview of the description, and then, like I said, I'll give my opinion on it. But from the description, create a spectral hand that can manipulate and interact with objects. 10 turns it's active, 18 meter radius, where you can summon it. Let me say this though. If you want to be super strategic, if you want to be a tactician, if you want to be smart with how you spend your turns, if you summon a Mage Hand before the fight, you can get that thing to push enemies from a distance. You can get that thing to steal items or move objects without pissing people off. You can get that thing to literally drop a crap ton of barrels and mid-fight, like I said, and just throw a bunch of shit. There is so many things you can do with this from a strategic standpoint. Now, is it a pain in the ass to set up? Is it ideal? Probably not the most ideal, but you can utilize it to be an absolute friend of yours. I think in the right hands, Mage Hand can be super important, super crucial, and probably honor mode runs, it can be really effective as well. Again, if you're trying to be super strategic. Now, if you're not about that business, if you want to just go in wrecking havoc, probably not the cantrip for you. Probably be like B or C. You might not even use it at all. But if you're trying to be super strategic and then play your cards right and be proud of your strategy, I think this thing could be A or even S in the right hands. But I think it's definitely A. Again, it has to be used in the right hands. No pun intended though. I know it's called Mage Hand. But next up we have, I think this is Acid Splash, if I'm correct. So Acid Splash, throw a bubble of acid that damage each creature it hits. To be honest with you, unless you're running like an acid build in particular, I don't think you're going to get the most out of this cantrip. It's not crazy in damage. I know Wizard has some evocation with some sort of acid shit, so maybe Poison Spray and Acid Splash can be considered pretty much next to each other. Let me go to Poison Spray real quick. 1 to 12 damage, project a puff of noxious gas. You could argue in the specific build they both B tier, but I think it's just way too specific. Like not even towards, you know, a big part of the player base. Like it's just too small of a situation to where you could say, oh, this is a good cantrip. Those two, I would say, nah, definitely C tier. Not completely useless. You can find uses for them, again, especially with the wizard, but not the strongest of builds, even if you try to build specifically towards that. Next up, we got Blade Ward. I would say Blade Ward borderlines on pretty useless. Now, this is definitely opinion based. If you're playing honor mode and you're trying to have someone tank, you could say it's B. But more often than not, like how long does it last? 2 turns? Let's get that out of the way. Blade Ward take only half damage from bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing attacks. It only lasts 2 turns. If it lasted longer, it could definitely go higher. But I think with the length that it lasts, it's pretty freaking useless. Now, it's not the worst cantrip in the game. We'll get to that. Next up, we have, is it Vampiric Touch or what's it called again? What's it called? Bone Chill. So Bone Chill prevents the target from healing until your next turn. An undead target receives disadvantage on attack rolls. Does necrotic damage, right? Yeah, so there's specific builds where you can help out your necrotic damage, so this could be better. But I would say more so B or C. I think it's easier to use this than these two. It's not something you're realistically going to rely on for consistent output in terms of damage, but I feel like there's more build options that you can do with this as opposed to these two. Again, it entirely depends on what you're going for, though. All in all, I'd rather just take the disadvantage against the undead, but also preventing the healing, I think is more useful than anything the poison has to offer. Because, I mean, there are times where you're playing against, if you know what you're dealing with, there are times where you're playing against characters who can heal. Preventing that is a nice little touch, especially since it doesn't cost a spell slot. Next, we have Dancing Lights. And if you're not familiar with Dancing Lights, let me read that briefly. Illuminate a 9-meter radius of light. Now, typically, you would think, oh, that's ass. It has its uses, I would say more so than these two, because it can be used to block vents. Now, if you're not familiar with vents, they're basically, like, for example, if we talk about the Hag's Lair, the poison that comes from the ground that's a trap, you can just use it to block that. Now, it might not seem like it's the most useful, but in modes like Honor Mode, in modes like Tactician, where you're trying to be more careful and, again, more strategic, using that to block those vents can be useful, more so than these two, which... Let me say this, these two is for a specific build. This can be universally used against every character has to deal with vents. Every single character has to deal with vents. Not every character has to deal with trying to use poison builds. So I think just being able to use that to block vents has its purposes. It is a cantrip, it is free. I would say this is B. Next up, we got Firebolt. If you're not familiar with Firebolt, let me briefly read that for you. So 1 to 10 damage, hurl a mode of fire, does fire damage. In terms of a cantrip, I would say A tier. I don't think it's higher than Mage. I mean, it could be higher than Mage, depending on, you know, who's using it. So I think these are pretty interchangeable. But my reasoning for Firebolt being A tier is that it's the more reliable damage output cantrip. If you're a wizard, if you're a sorcerer, you're probably going to use this a lot early game. So it's something that you're going to be using more so than these two, this one. Again, it's free. It does decent damage. 1 to 10 is not bad, but it does increase over time. And if you're going for that fire build, if you have fire gear, you can increase the damage output even a bit more. So I would say Firebolt's definitely A tier for a cantrip. Nothing too crazy, but considering there's not a whole lot of damage you're getting from a lot of these, it's one of the better ones. Next up, we have Light here. And Light's an interesting one because infuse an object with an aura of light. It doesn't sound very good, but... funny enough, if you're in the darkness, your accuracy gets worse. What you can do is get rid of your armor, place it, like literally place it in the world. So just drop it. You can actually cast light on that armor and you will permanently have that light surrounded around you until you long rest, and you can kind of just continuously do it over and over and over again. So it's very free, very easy. And again, having that extra accuracy in terms of that disadvantage can be a big deal. The thing to remember about cantrips though is because it's free, you have to utilize it in situations to where it benefits you. Now, these two Blade Ward. Now, are there situations where it can benefit you? Sure, but the very particular moments, very specific. Light, while it is particular, you just drop it on your armor. It's a set and forget. You never have to use it again. I think that's very, very useful. Can't stress enough though, that set and forget mentality, it definitely goes a long way. Next up, we have Minor Illusion. I think this can definitely be A tier in terms of a cantrip. It's just used to distract others. Let me briefly read the description for those that aren't familiar. Create an illusionary image that distracts nearby creatures, compelling them to investigate. You can remain hidden while casting the spell. And if you're playing solo, this might be more useful than in terms of a group, because if you're playing with the group, you can use your teammates to, distract other people, whether it's play a song or whatever, but not everyone's adept in musical instrument. But Minor Illusion is just a good way of kind of maneuvering your way, hiding, or trying to get in spots where you're not typically allowed to get into. And it is a cantrip. Again, the whole point of cantrips is that it's free of spell slots. If any of these costed a spell slot, they would not have the same amount of value they have now. But again, Minor Illusion, pretty solid. Produce Flame is a weird one because it's pretty freaking useless, except in the Underdark. When you need to be in light, you can just kind of produce that flame, have that light on you, set and forget. But other than that, it's not going to have any use. So it's going to be C for me, because it's like very particular, unless you need light in other situations. But it's not. Let me read it briefly for those of you that are a little confused about it. Produce Flame. A flickering flame appears in your hand. It sheds bright light in a 9-meter radius and deals 1 to 8 damage when thrown. Throwing the flame immediately after you conjure it does not cost an action. Extinguishing or throwing it on subsequent turns costs an action. It's just not all that useful, to be honest. You're not going to spend turns producing the flame and throwing it. Really, the only purpose is to have that light for the Underdark. Really, really not a good cantrip. I would say C tier. Ray of Frost is one of those that belongs with Firebolt because, well, let me read the description for those of you that aren't familiar. Also, I didn't even bother reading the S tier subscriptions. It's the world we live in now. But anyway, I didn't bother reading the S tier, so I'll actually get to those as well. I just assumed that since they're S tier, most people would know what they are. So for Eldritch Blast, conjure 1 beam of crackling energy, does 1 to 10 force damage. But as I said earlier, it is cracked because there's Eldritch invocations that can specifically make that cantrip way stronger. Friends is really, really, really good. Gain advantage on charisma checks against a non-hostile creature. Once the spell ends, the creature knows it was charmed and might accuse the spellcaster. So in higher difficulty modes, the target might accuse you of enchanting them, which can be a problem. Maybe in honor mode, because you don't want to pick any fights. So in honor mode, this might be lower, but for your average player, this cantrip's pretty freaking godly. Guidance. Bestow guidance upon an ally. They gain a 1d4 bonus to ability checks. In dialogue, this is going to help so much. Really, in any time you just need your ability to come through, guidance helps so freaking much. And then we were about to read Ray of Frost, so let's get to that real quickly. Ray of Frost. Reduce the target's movement speed by 3 meters, and it does 1 to 8 cold damage. Now, the reason why I have this as A tier is because it's one of your more consistent cantrips in terms of damage, but also there's a lot of cold damage builds that you can do, and being also able to slow targets down by 3 meters, while it seems pretty useless, depending on how you play, you can kind of play an attack and run away kind of build, and they'll be forced to dash at you. They'll be forced to be significantly slower than they could, because let me remind you, most people have 9 meters of movement. So going from 9 to 6 is a significant nerf. Granted, it's very particular of how a playstyle would be of you constantly using Ray of Frost and running away. It might be boring, it might not be fun, but there's also several builds to where you can buff your cold damage or do stuff with your cold damage to inflict chill or other kind of stuff. So it can be useful for a cantrip, for sure. Next up, we have Resistance, and this is one of the harder ones for me to rank because I don't have too much familiarity in it. Make a target more resistant to spell effects and conditions. It receives a 1d4 bonus to saving throws. Because it's a cantrip, it can have its uses, especially if someone's concentrating, but I don't even know if it's specifically for concentrating saving throws, if that's even the same thing. I'm not entirely sure. But will Resistance, it's like really, really, really situational, I'd imagine. I don't have too much mileage on it, so it's not fair of me to be definitive with the ranking that I put it on. So whatever you guys think, let me know in the comments on this one. I'm really unsure of resistance. You know, I've seen a bit of it, but not so much to where I have a definitive answer in my mind, at least. Maybe you guys have more insight than I do with that specific spell or cantrip. I've never played cleric. I've tried druid very briefly, but just not too much enough of resistance to be able to make a definitive answer on this one. So I'm gonna leave it in C for now. I haven't found much use of it, but let me know what you guys think. Sacred Flame is definitely bad, like really bad. If I feel like it always misses. If you're not familiar with the description, let me briefly read it for you guys. Conjure a flame-like radiance that deals 1d8 radiant damage. It's exclusive to the cleric. It's bad. I'd argue D tier maybe, but I think D tier has bad spells in it of its own. Like Blade Ward, if you have it through an item, it's not as bad. But like to pick it as a cantrip, it just feels like it doesn't make much sense. It doesn't really give you much use. Sacred Flame's really bad though. I'd argue it's D tier. I'm gonna leave it at the bottom of C for now. I have a bit of trouble pronouncing this one. Shillelagh? Imbue your staff or club with nature's power. It becomes magical, deals 1d8 plus 2 bludgeoning damage, and uses your spellcasting ability to attack for attack rolls. So, in my brief experience, it's not bad, just not great. You're not going to get much mileage out of this one, and there's not a whole lot I can say about it because I believe it's exclusive to the druid, and I dabbled in the druid a little bit, not enough to where I can definitively tell you one is better than the other. So I'm not like definitive about this being better than resistance. These two, yeah. I mean, I guess you could argue because I believe Acid Splash, is that what it's called? Acid Splash, maybe. Yeah. So I think this one's AoE. So I guess you could argue, hey, this because it's AoE is better than this. But you're definitely going to get more consistent output from this one. And Acid Splash, you're using for the AoE maybe to detect hidden enemies, but if you have see invisibility, this is pretty much useless. So I'm gonna leave this at B for now. I'm a little bit unsure of that one, to be honest with you. Next up, we have Shocking Grasp. Now, I would say Shocking Grasp is definitely high B. My reasoning being is while it is situational. Let me read the description very briefly just so you guys know what I'm talking about here. So it does 1d8 lightning damage. The target cannot use reactions. This spell has advantage on creatures wearing metal armor. Now, typically, you're not thinking much of it, but because this right here, the target cannot use reactions, if you know the fight you're getting yourself into where you want to take away someone's reactions, it is a cantrip. You know, you don't have to waste a spell slot. Now, you do have to waste an action, so that might deteriorate you from... It might push you away from wanting to use the move itself, but it has situational use. You could argue, you could really argue this is like C tier, and I honestly would not like go against that. But I think stopping people from using reactions is better than stopping people from being invisible, because at least with being invisible, you can see it with invisibility if you have that ability already, whether you got it from Volo or something else. So we got Thaumaturgy. I don't know how to pronounce that very well. Manifest a sign of supernatural power that grants you advantage on intimidation and performance checks. Considering that both of those are charisma, it's worse than friends definitively, but it's right there with Mage Hand in terms of utility. Very good use. Oh shoot, let me move this back. But yeah, it provides you really solid use. Again, being able to get those intimidation checks, performance, whatever the case may be, not having to waste an inspiration or having to save scum, or if you're in honor mode, being able to use it period is actually a big help. So it has very good uses. In honor mode, honestly, you might be able to argue it's higher just because you're not even charming a target, right? With friends, you're charming a target. They can accuse you of that. With this, you're just flat out using it, not charming a target. They can't accuse you of anything. So in honor mode, this actually might be here. In a traditional mode, though, again, for your average player, probably A tier. Next up, we got Thorn Whip. Thorn Whip, I would say, is low A or really high B. I think people can get their good uses out of Thorn Whip just for repositioning. Now, there is an item in the game that I believe you get from the Druid camp or is it called the Druid Camp? Whatever the case may be, I think you guys know what I'm talking about pretty early in the game. You can get an item that allows you to use Thorn Whip as a bonus action. Now, again, I know I'm not specifically wanting to talk about bonus actions and specific gear items, but my brother ended up using Thorn Whip a lot, and it actually is pretty helpful and gives you some decent mileage in terms of repositioning certain people to where you can, you know, kind of strategize around that. So it's not great, but it's definitely solid and has its uses. I would say B tier. Next up, we have True Strike. This is actually the worst cantrip in the whole game. If you're not familiar, I didn't even read the Thorn Whip, by the way. I guess I should read that first, and then I'll read True Strike. But strike a target with a thorny vine-like whip. It deals 1 to 6 piercing damage and pulls the target 3 meters closer to you if it is a large or smaller in size. Anyway, True Strike. Gain advantage on your next attack roll, but it only lasts 2 turns. And it costs concentration. Because it only lasts 2 turns, it really only lasts 1 turn, because when you cast it, you're probably out of an action unless you have haste. So you really only get 1 turn out of the True Strike. Like, the 2-turn spells are really just rough, because at least with Blade Ward, it actually is 2 turns, because as soon as you cast it, you know, the people who attack you, you get 2 turns of it. With True Strike, you end your turn and it goes to 1 turn on your next turn. So True Strike is just awful. Absolutely awful. There's literally no use for it unless you're trying to, I don't know what. Honestly, I don't even know what you could do with it. Next up, that we have Vicious Mockery. I'm a little unsure of this one. You know, I've seen fair share of use with it. I think it's more so for fun. Unleash a string of enchanted insults at a creature. It takes damage and receives disadvantage on its next attack roll. I would leave it at around B tier. I mean, in terms of coolness, sure, you could say A, but it just doesn't seem like it has the greatest of uses. Now, I think one hot take that I might have had is maybe Bone Chill could be higher. I think there might be enough builds to where it could warrant a higher grade in terms of being put to A. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do this, and then this can be pretty much here. You might be able to use that more than Ray of Frost. I guess it just depends on your build. I think the common thing here, though, is more so utility. Utility is really, really, really useful here. Again, Friends, Guidance, Mage Hand. I don't know how to pronounce this, but that. Light, Minor Illusion, or not Minor Illusion. What is it called again? Illusion, Major, Minor, Minor Illusion. Okay. The only actual damage output cantrip you're going to get here is Eldritch Blast. But I would say these 3 are here. I was a little bit too rough on Bone Chill. Is it called Bone Chill? Man, I really forget these names. I do not have the greatest memory, but yeah, Bone Chill I would say is here. There's a couple of ones I'm unsure about with resistance. Right here. This one right here I'm a little bit unsure about. But everything else feels pretty accurate. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here just to make sure I'm remembering everything. And yeah, I don't think I'm forgetting anything here. All of this seems pretty simple stuff. I mean, the only reason why Sacred Flame is in a C tier is because I don't think you need to have a target in your LOS, line of sight, for those of you who don't know that. So that could be okay. Still bad, but I think it's C. But this is my tier list. Let me know what you guys think, though. I don't think I have too many hot takes, if any, but people with different builds can do different kinds of things. What you like is what maybe I disrespected a little too much. What you disrespect, maybe I liked a little bit too much. At the end of the day, it's a discussion. So this is my list. Let me know what you guys think. As always, I appreciate you guys for watching. This is Ollie Been Different. We've been different. And we out.